Whispering Woods has reopened its doors to the public once more, much to everyone's relief. Genevieve Joyce is overjoyed to see people learning about the animals being rehabilitated once more, and Jonathan Vaughn is excited to see money rolling in again, and not just out. But of course, there will always be more injured and orphaned animals to save, and Wesley Parsons isn't about to give up on them, even if the bank accounts are running low. With rewilding efforts blooming in both urban and rural locations, specifically reintroducing beavers, animals are unfortunately more likely to get harmed, by accident or on purpose. Due to the recent acts of anti-environmentalist groups, Anna Kingston wants to open a new exhibit showcasing the wonderful work beavers do as a keystone species in creating extensive wetlands that house vast amounts of biodiversity. However, a wrench is thrown into these plans when an injured raccoon arrives at the haven, having escaped its illegal containment as an exotic pet. And to make matters more interesting, it is delivered to the zoo's doorstep by Arthur Joyce, one of Genevieve's brothers. Welcome back to Whispering Woods, Wildlife Haven. Hey everyone, Spare here. Bet you weren't expecting that little curveball right there, but before we get to that, first I wanted to talk about this small staff area next to the deer park and next to our new enclosure, where I've put a bunch of staff buildings and facilities, and as you can see from this menu and the few that I just opened, it is encroaching on guests' positivity. So what we want to do is we want to encircle it with a bunch of decor to make it look a little bit nicer. And now we can see that it is 100% scenery. The radius has been reduced as much as it can, and it is 50-50 on the radius. So this is what it used to look like before. And after adding scenery, it has reduced it to half the size. This is how you can have staff buildings close to your guest pathways without having them complain about them in challenge or franchise mode. From here, I'm going to do a bunch of terrain work because what I want to do is lower the path into what I mentioned was Predator Ridge. Now, obviously, beavers and raccoons are not predators, but this is going to be the entrance from the various deer enclosures into Predator Ridge, and then we're going to walk through said ridge and then over to the lynx, along with a few other animals along the way that I have planned, but I'm not going to tell you just yet. Feel free to guess them in the comments below. Now, if you are kind of not a fan of terrain work like I am, although after this I think I am a little bit more so, the Align to Angle tool is very useful for slopes, because the flattened to terrain is if you're trying to make everything flat, but flattened to angle will help you do slopes a lot better. And then I obviously tried to even it out for the path as well. So our beavers, once I figured out exactly how big their enclosure should be, this is bigger than they need, but once they have babies and once the raccoons have babies, it might be a little bit too small. It was a little bit difficult to figure out how I wanted to do this because I did want to have a few bodies of water. Beavers do need at least 3 meters of diving in order to do their deep dive animation, so I wanted to make sure that they would be doing that. And I did also want guests to have an opportunity to view them doing that, which can be a little bit difficult when it comes to planning. So this front lake here is where the deep diving animation is going to be visible to the guests, and then the tank at the back is going to be the one that is more private for the beavers and the raccoons, because raccoons do also swim and they do also have a water requirement, which is really interesting. So raccoons aren't actually a European species. They're actually considered invasive in England, which is where Whispering Woods is set, which means that technically they wouldn't be rescues, which is why the raccoons that are in Whispering Woods are going to be from an illegal pet trade, being kept illegally in homes, escaping from those homes, etc. Though there have been studies that if raccoons were to be rewilded into England or to just escape from containment in zoos and other locations, they would be able to thrive on their own because they are very resourceful. So do keep that in mind as we are building this enclosure. Here I was trying to get the water to work in a connected way, but I ended up just making two different bodies of water using the glass barriers. You can't use construction pieces to contain water. It has to be the barriers, unfortunately, or terrain. And honestly, I think barriers are easier to work with a lot of the time. So now I'm just gonna put the terrain up to the barriers as close as I can. And that is going to be about the same height. That's why I have that pink rectangle there. Normally you can't manipulate terrain if there is water around it. So that's why I have the construction piece there, instead marking the level of the water. Once I put my waterfall in between the two, one of the water bodies is slightly taller than the other, then I'm able to put the rest of the barriers around. As you can see, I'm not putting the null barriers all the way around. I'm actually connecting them to the glass. So the glass barriers I had made not the habitat perimeter, and then here I'm just going to outline the habitat perimeter and then check off that little box. This way you can have barriers within the habitat that hold water, for example, or other things, whatever that may be, but also have a habitat perimeter. Do note that this will kind of affect your enrichment items and other things that have those restrictions when it comes to barriers, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. After I had my barriers in place, I wanted to make sure that the rock work covered most of them. We don't want those glass barriers cutting out through the land. And then because I also was working with water, I didn't want to remove it just in case I wasn't able to place it back again. So that's why we're going to be going underwater quite a few times in this episode, just to make sure that the rocks and the foliage underneath the water are looking good. On the front of this upper pond, I decided to put plaster because it is very likely that it would be man-made in some capacity. It's obviously not going to be a completely natural lake. You would have to be really lucky to buy land with a lake with a waterfall in it, going to another lake that you could put animals in. Practically not possible. And then once those are all outlined, I'm going to add some water effects. So here we're putting some of the waterfall bottom. We have a waterfall top near the rocks, and then also a rapids splash, so that we can have the water looking like it's coming off of the rocks as it comes down. We're also, of course, going to put a bunch of faux rocks. Luckily, the raccoons and the beavers are able to get over those relatively easily, and they do not obstruct their movement. Underwater, we're going to put a bunch of hydrilla plants and the eel grass as well, just to make it look a little bit more planted. For the tree line, you'll see me zooming out quite a bit to make sure that the sight lines are what I want them to be. I decided we would use a little bit more color in this enclosure because we are mostly green all over Whispering Woods, and the colors of Whispering Woods are green. So I'm really starved of a little bit more color, which is why we're going to get the sugar maples in here. The rest of the trees are going to be quite green, but this is one of the first times that I have been putting taller trees into an enclosure. Last time we were very focused on short trees. This time I am actively looking for tall trees. These beaver items are actually off of the workshop. I did run out of time to create them myself, otherwise I would have, but they are absolutely stunning. Like that beaver dam and then the lodge, highly recommend. Those are available in the Steam Workshop link down below. To create some custom barriers for this enclosure, I again used Indonesian stained timber, and I apologize for always using these pieces. I actually got called out for it in a Discord recently. Of course, it's always this piece, but hey, they just work really, really well. So we're gonna make a 4-meter piece. It won't be quite this tall because the animals really don't need it to be. We're gonna make it about 3 meters tall. And then I will stagger those pieces up and down so that it looks a little bit more random with the logs, and we'll also recolor it to have a few different tones of wood, because then that will help it blend into the background more naturally rather than being just a solid block of the same color. We're also going to put a little hot wire, not quite a hot wire, but just like an anti-climbing wire, so that the raccoons aren't tempted to try to escape the enclosure, because they are very smart and they will absolutely do that if given the chance to. This enclosure is actually inspired by quite a few things, so let me tell you about them. The first is the rewilding effort in England, and I had the pleasure of watching a video recently by a creator called Sam Bentley. And if you don't know who that is, do check out their link in the description, because he shares good news every single month. So he does like a roundup of good news from around the world for every single month. And in the good news for July, there was a story about England's rewilding efforts of reintroducing the Eurasian beaver into rural and urban locations so that they could help to naturalize the environment. And I thought that was really, really cool, and that immediately made me think of Whispering Woods, where we're really trying to educate the public about the positives that the wildlife can have in their community. Highly, highly recommend. I love some of his stories. Most of his stories, honestly. Like, there's probably not a single one I have disagreed with so far. And then the other thing that really inspired this enclosure was the idea of having a water diving animal, so one that goes below the ground level, but also having an animal that goes above the ground level at the same time so that you have a little bit more visual interest. So raccoons give an enrichment bonus in Planet Zoo with beavers. Obviously these are North American beavers and not Eurasian beavers, but we're just going to use them as a stand-in. Raccoons are technically illegal in England. They are considered an invasive species, but if given the chance, I'm sure they would thrive. I actually saw a very interesting YouTube video recently about raccoons breaking into trash cans in Ontario. So Ontario specifically designed their trash cans so raccoons wouldn't be able to get into them. And somehow they didn't consider the raccoon's intelligence, they instead focused on the raccoon's strength. And so these garbage cans that they designed to be raccoon-proof proved not to be, because they would just knock them over, and then even with the lack of opposable thumbs, they were able to turn the top lock and open the trash can. So raccoons are truly a remarkable species, and I do believe that if they were to infiltrate any country where they are considered invasive, they would probably still be able to survive. But anyway, let's get back to what is happening in our video. This is a wall set that I created for the building, and there I was just measuring it up against the people. We're going to create a wood slat look using, again, the Indonesian timbers, and recolor that to some of the browns, the lighter and the darker ones that we have around the sanctuary already. Because I built it on a grid, it's really easy to slot into the spots that it needs to be in, which makes it very, very easy to build a building out of it. This set is available on the workshop if you would like to use it yourself, so do check out the link in the description below. The doorway is going to be made up of both the Indonesian timbers, and I also ended up using the twilight planks. So if you would like to use this blueprint, you will need the tropical pack and the twilight pack, and then the plaster from the North Africa pack. Apologies for not making a base game version. If you would like a base game version, please let me know in the comments below and I will see what I can do. So here I'm just rotating things around to make the doorway. I did want to have the peek-throughs with the windows and the doorway. Normally, I will just kind of slap on one of the in-game doors or the in-game windows, but something about this building, like, I really just wanted to make it a little bit more genuine and have that aspect of glass within the walls and that breakthrough rather than just slapping something onto an existing wall. Maybe I'm just getting more meticulous with my building, which is honestly kind of a worry because I'm not sure I'll be able to keep this level of detail up for a while, but we shall see how it goes. Since this is also the last episode of August, I would like to talk about the future of the channel. Seeing as I am a teacher, which is what most of you are aware of, you will know that this school year is probably going to be a little bit more difficult in terms of content. So I would still like to put out a video every 2 weeks. Bi-weekly would be ideal. I do not think I'll be able to keep up the weekly updates. between teaching during the day and then also extracurricular teaching such as tutoring and music lessons, I just don't think it will be possible. As much as I would love to make YouTube just a full-time thing where I just build all day every day and tell you guys about more animal facts, that's just unfortunately not a reality. So if you would like to support me, do make sure to leave a like and a comment, and possibly subscribe if you aren't already, and that will help me out a lot. But just know that the updates going forward will be bi-weekly rather than weekly. And we will be starting up Rising Sun Zoological Gardens eventually once we've gotten our fill of Whispering Woods. Once we're done with the building and the second floor where the raccoons will have access through climbing, we're going to put some enrichment items down around the enclosure. Over here next to the building, I'm also going to build a porch of sorts. This is not actually accessible by the guests because I couldn't get a path this close to the water, but I am going to pretend that it could work. It would also be really cool if we had an education talk point up here, but of course we can't because there's no path. However, if this were a real zoo, I can definitely see an educator standing up here and then having a bunch of guests standing below them on the path, as well as within the education center itself, listening to them talk about the beavers and the raccoons. These barriers here are again a combination of twilight and Indonesian stained timber pieces, so that's always very nice to work with. As I said, lots of color in this one, and I love that the building occurred around sunset because it gives that glow, like that golden hour feel to a lot of this build. And that's exactly what I was going for. So we're going to use a lot of the Virginia creeper on the building itself, covering it up quite a bit rather than using the green ivy because it just adds more brightness, more color. And then we're going to make sure that the raccoons have enough climbing space. One thing I like to do, even though it is a little bit wasteful in terms of money if you're playing challenge or franchise, is using the longer beams to figure out just how long the climbing areas should be. And then once you have that measured out, you can just replace it with the 2 meter or 1 meter. It's so much easier to do it that way. One other thing that I wanted to do was build these sort of tunnels that we can put up in trees that the raccoons will climb into. Now the tree bark pieces are not climbable, which is why I put that Australian plank piece in there. And as you can see, they can technically climb into them. Jury's still out if they can actually, or if they will actually make use of them. The bark pieces looked really good on the outside. However, a lot of zoos will do this with either bark or they will actually use plastic barrels and put them up in trees. And then raccoons or porcupines or other climbing creatures will use them as perches or resting places. This was entirely inspired by Aqua Zoo at Rewilding, which I was lucky enough to see on Zoo Chat, and then also lucky enough to get real life pictures of from a friend in a Discord. So if you're ever looking for zoo inspiration, again, Zoo Chat, but also do join a Planet Zoo Discord because there is always zoo inspiration to be found. We're going to add some more climbing structures here. So again, using that 4 meter piece to measure out how far the rope needs to go. And then I'm going to put an Australian plank behind this tree because the broken trees for some reason are not climbable, which I find absolutely infuriating because you would think that the broken trees would actually be the most climbable pieces in the nature tab. This one, like the broken birch, the broken Himalayan pine, the broken Scots pine, all of them. None of them have the climbable feature, and I'm actually not entirely sure why. I absolutely think they should. For the educational aspects such as donation bins and education boards, I'm going to use more white birch pieces. So for the education bins, I'm just surrounding them with these twigs, and then we're just going to copy them around to give this really cool texture, if I do say so myself. I actually really love the way it turned out. As for the education boards, I thought I would build just logs and sticks and stuff that is used for climbing within the enclosure, almost like an easel is what it looks like. And then on that will rest the education board. Still not sure how I feel about this. Do let me know what you think. And as always, I managed to put the TV screen on upside down. so I had to rotate that around. And then we're going to sink the education board underneath so that guests still get the education bonus. On the inside, I'm going to create this education area with a raccoon on a stump. So we have the raccoon represented and then the stump as the beaver. And behind that, I actually ended up using a lot of the Twilight decals, which I don't use very often. So we have those creepy trees, and then we also have the mushrooms and the moon. And then the only ones that aren't from the Twilight pack are those bushes. I use them as bushes, but they're actually rocks. And then we're also going to add some greenery in here using some plants, but I wanted to create my own pottery. And this is something that Ricey is very good at. I usually use the blueprints, but I wasn't quite sure about any of them, which is why I tried creating my own. And I ended up going with the woven basket from the East Asia theme and the conservation pot recolored to a brown color. And that's just gonna go all the way around, and we're gonna fill those with plants as we go. The education center does end up telling the story of a raccoon sneaking into the building and going through the researcher's desk, maybe messing around with a few plants, and then ending up on that tree stump. But you're probably still here because you want to know more about Arthur Joyce. Well, hit that subscribe button and maybe we'll have a look into his agenda next time. In the meantime, enjoy these happy beavers and the industrious raccoons, who've already escaped their enclosure multiple times despite no escape points noted on the heat map. And I will see you next time. Bye.